9:30. Okay, we should begin. We are in the middle of our look at the sun as we continue looking at what we can see of the wonders of God's creation through astronomy, through looking at the solar system, the universe, the various galaxies. We're focusing in more on our solar system now and looking at the wonderful creation of the sun. We covered the first 5 chapters last time, and we're going to pick it up with solar flares and sunspots.
Ever since the early 1600s, astronomers like Galileo observed sunspots. Then later, more powerful telescopes revealed solar flares. Over the years, scientists began to understand the power and effect of these features. But there's still so much we don't know. It seems sunspots and solar flares are part of a design system.
Many people think that these things, if you look at the sun through a special telescope, you can filter out a lot of the light. They'll think a solar flare will just jump out at you. It doesn't. A solar flare puts out minimal energy in the visible part of the spectrum. The real heavy lifting is in the ultraviolet and in other wavelengths. It's associated with sunspots. When you have a sunspot maximum, we have an 11-year cycle, roughly 11 years, where the sunspots are great in number and they're less in number. And during solar maximum, you have a lot of magnetic activity on the sun. You get a lot of solar flares. You get outrushes of particles from solar flares that send these charged particles out towards the Earth. They cause aurorae, or northern lights. And you got the sunspot cycle that is tied to magnetic effects. We don't really know what causes the magnetic fields to kick up. We're just kind of starting with a gimme there on all of this. And the sunspot cycle does appear to have a long-term effect on climate. That's almost undeniable. The reason why people don't talk about it much is because there's no known mechanism connecting it. Again, suggesting there's a lot we don't know about the physics of this thing going on. But the sun is stable, but it also has these variances in sunspots.
The sun does have a periodicity to it. There's a sunspot cycle where you find that every 11 years you get a lot of sunspots with fewer in between. And we've now found that that's actually half of a much larger, of a 22-year cycle. And that's linked in with solar magnetism. Sunspots are magnetic. They're related to magnetic field lines preventing convection underneath them, and so they cool off. But the sun has an incredibly interesting and complex magnetic field. It has several magnetic fields. It has a polar magnetic field, just like the Earth's, North Pole and South Pole. But it also has toroidal magnetic fields, for which there's no equivalent on Earth. A toroidal field is where it wraps around, like that. So if you were to hold your compass, it would point east-west, and you could go all the way around in a complete loop. And there's at least 2 of these, one in the northern hemisphere and one in the southern hemisphere that's reversed. And so that loops around sort of like that. It's rather interesting. And there's a complex interplay of these. There's also lots of little bits of magnetism all over the surface that just sort of have a random orientation. We've noticed, though, that the magnetic fields, that these toroidal magnetic fields, what we think are there, sunspots tend to occur at those latitudes. So you tend to find sunspots at specific latitudes on the sun and very few near the poles. And these zones actually move toward the equator with a period of about 11 years. And then the sunspots go away, and then they start up again, move toward the equator, and they start up again. And we think that's because the sun has what's called a meridional circulation, which I actually was able to detect in my doctoral dissertation, my doctoral research. And that pushes these magnetic field lines toward the equator, where they annihilate, and then new ones form. And this happens every 11 years. And the polar magnetic field reverses. So Earth's North Pole has been the North Pole for quite some time. The sun flips every 11 years, and it ties into that large 22-year cycle.
Okay, so under solar flares and sunspots, number 1, according to the video, how early in history were sunspots detected? The 1600s, already in the time of Galileo. You could put filters on telescopes so that you could look directly at the sun through the telescope, and you could see sunspots. As opposed to the sunspots, which are apparently due to changes in the magnetic polarization of the sun. What are solar flares? Yes, And we're going to distinguish solar flares from what we see in the next section, mass ejections. So this is not actually material being shot out, but rather the radiation being shot out. And what part of the light spectrum is most affected by solar flares? They are tied into that, but rather than changing the visible light, it changes
It's the difference in
the ultraviolet and the invisible light spectrum is what's affected by the solar flare. So it doesn't really affect us in a day-to-day way unless we go up to the northern part of Norway or into Alaska and we go see the northern lights. Then we have the effects of the solar flares. And those happen regularly enough that people can plan their trips around the northern lights so that they can go see them. And, yes, Deb?
Does the southern hemisphere have anything like that?
Nope, they are strictly the northern lights. And I've tried to explain the science behind it, but the more I explain it, the more it becomes obvious that I just don't understand it myself. So I just...
Well, neither did Chevy Chase family in National
Yeah.
Christmas vacation.
That's right. Neither did they. So yeah, I just enjoy them, appreciate. I did get to see the northern lights in Alaska several times. It's pretty interesting. And when you see people who've made the trip to the northern lights, I mean, you can plan your trip out to the extent that you know when there are likely to be northern lights, but you don't know for sure until you actually see them. And then when you see them, wow, it's really something to see. I think I saw a video one place of people who were viewing the northern lights from an airplane as they were traveling, and that was pretty spectacular. How long is the full cycle of these flares?
22 years.
Yeah, the full cycle is 22 years, and every 11 years, the polarization of the polar magnetic fields of the sun reverses. So the north pole of the sun becomes the south pole becomes the north pole. What kind of magnetic field does the sun have that's just like the Earth? We had a bunch of, we just mentioned the polar magnetic field is just like the Earth, but it also has a magnetic field that is unlike the Earth, the toroidal magnetic field that also wraps around and is also affected by these little smaller pools of magnetism which are related to the sunspots. It's not an absolute equivalence. Wherever you have the pools of magnetism, they're the sunspots, but they're related. And you noted too that toroidal, those toroidal fields kind of spin against each other. There's the one spinning clockwise, there's one spinning counterclockwise, and they move up and down in a predictable way too, according to that 11-year cycle. True or false, do these solar flares affect our climate? True. There's just so much radiation that's being put out. Our Earth absorbs a certain amount of that radiation, and the way that the notes speak of it, there's no doubt that it must affect our climate somehow. That's almost undeniable, it says. But we have a kind of a hard time measuring it, exactly what the effect is. So, all right, let's move on then to chapter 7, Earth's protection against the sun.
Overall, our sun is a very stable star. Yet sunspots and solar flares have the potential to cause us great harm. Through God's providence, He has designed our Earth with many protections against these harmful elements.
Some of the sun's magnetic field lines of force get all twisted and tangled up, and then they'll rip out some gas of the sun with them, and then the magnetic lines of force release some of their energy suddenly and spew out these particles violently, and sometimes they're headed toward Earth.
Now, when a flare happens, if it's directed away from the Earth, we experience nothing. If it's directed directly at the Earth, then a lot of times that flare will release cosmic rays and things like that from the sun. And those will impact Earth satellites, and they can cause static on those satellites. If the flare triggers what's called a coronal mass ejection, which is where lots of material is released away from the sun, and if it's directed toward the Earth, you have two possibilities. One, it could do nothing. If the magnetic field of the coronal mass ejection is aligned with the Earth's, it'll harmlessly pass over Earth's poles. On the other hand, if it's opposite Earth's magnetic field, it will disturb Earth's magnetic field, which vibrates particles that are trapped in Earth's magnetic field and causes them to glow, and you get what we call the northern lights.
And the magnetic field acts pretty much like a shield. The particles will just spiral around the lines of force and come down near the magnetic poles, and they produce the aurora borealis and the aurora australis, the one in the South Pole. In hitting the Earth's magnetic field, they do create surges of magnetic field on the Earth's surface that can disrupt power networks. If you have a big, large set of power lines acting in which this magnetic field has changed, you'll get surges of high voltage, and those will sometimes do damage. At the same time, the Earth's ionosphere is excited by these particles, and communication satellites get damaged, at least disrupted, by these particles. So a lot of interesting things happen.
Aside from generating these beautiful northern lights, which is just delightful, it's actually a design feature, it's a life feature of the Earth that it has this magnetic field that deflects this harmful radiation harmlessly around us. It doesn't prevent all of it, but it prevents enough of it that life is possible, and the atmosphere contributes a bit as well. If we didn't have that magnetic field, it would be a problem. And in fact, the astronauts in space, as long as they're orbiting around the Earth, they're still inside Earth's magnetic field. But if they go to the moon or something like that, it could be an issue. If a major solar flare happens, it could cause problems for astronauts in space. And that's something that astronomers are looking into as they plan for things like a mission to Mars or something like that. Mars doesn't have that protective magnetic field. And so they'll have to find some way to deal with that problem. But the Earth, specially designed for life.
The sun is a huge energy machine, and it could be a danger to us. And as we look at the design of the Earth, the solar system, we have realized that there are several invisible shields that protect us and make life possible down here. For instance, the sun is a noisy place, continual nuclear explosions on a grand scale. If we could hear the sun, we'd be deafened. No, we'd be flattened. But of course, sound does not travel through the vacuum of space, and so we get the pleasant morning light, but not the sound. The sun gives off what's called the solar wind, which is a form of radiation, fragments of atoms, and radiation could be a hazard to us. It doesn't make it here. It gets caught up in the Earth's magnetic field and gets turned aside. The sun gives off what's called ultraviolet light, which can cause skin damage and problems. That gets absorbed by the ozone layer, which is high in our atmosphere and is still there and is still healthy and doing a good job of protecting us. The sun gives off X-rays, and they can be dangerous, but they never make it through the upper atmosphere. They're filtered out on the way. There's one shield after another, and I'm sure we haven't even found them all yet, these ways that God has set up the Earth for us. And the other planets do not seem to have these shields. They have their own hazards and dangers. I think it all shows how this place was planned for us.
Okay, what is a coronal mass ejection? Yes, it is tied in with solar flare activity. The solar flare, the radiation from the solar flare, can sometimes cause the sun to actually eject material. And as the sun is so superheated, the material isn't solid, it's all gas, but it's all real particles, actual mass that's being ejected. And that then causes some interesting things to happen. There we go. what does the Earth's magnetic field do?
Projects us to west.
Yes, if the polarization of the radiation that's coming from the sun matches ours, it just goes right around us. Doesn't affect us at all. But if it's opposite ours, then then what happens? According to the video.
That's when the aurora borealis or the aurora australis.
That's when you get the northern lights, when the material itself is absorbed into, I believe it's the ionosphere, and then you see these solar particles that then glow a greenish color. And, there is such a thing as the aurora australis, but I don't think it's nearly as vivid as the aurora borealis. I could be wrong on that, and if any of you find out that I'm wrong, feel free to correct me. But what would happen if we could hear the constant eruptions on the sun's surface?
It would flatten us.
It would be deafening to the point of flattening us, just knocking us over. The sound waves would be so very loud. Why don't we hear it? We're shielded by multiple layers. You got that quote there that from Donald DeYoung that's printed there, and then you saw it in the video. There's one shield after another, and I'm sure we haven't even found them all yet.
But it also says that sound doesn't travel through the vacuum of space.
Right. And we're protected then by that vacuum even more than anything else. So if an astronaut is out in a spacewalk and needs to call to someone, he can't just yell to someone 10 feet away. He has to speak through a walkie-talkie or something. So those waves just aren't an issue for us. But if there were air to carry those waves, they would be. What is solar wind? Yeah. It's more of a constant thing, as I understand it, than actually the solar flares themselves, which just pop up unpredictably. But the solar wind is how the radiation from the sun gets to the planets to warm them, and especially gets to our Earth in order to give us the energy that we need. But it doesn't just give us the energy we need, it also gives us some energy that we'd probably prefer not to have. What protects us from the ultraviolet light? The ozone layer. And is it still healthy? Well, it's working. However, it has been surmised that perhaps before the flood, the ozone layer was far more robust. There was much more water vapor in the ozone layer, and much of that water vapor then came down in the flood, meaning there was less mass of water on the earth before the flood than after. That there was, in essence, think of a protective water canopy that almost completely shielded the earth from ultraviolet light. Now, why do people surmise that, some creationists? Well, because before the flood and after the flood, you have dramatic differences in the lifespan of human beings. You've got Adam living to 930 years, Methuselah living to 969 years. Noah himself is like 500 years old when the flood happens. People are living for hundreds of years. As soon as the flood is done, then what? Terah, Abraham's father, lives for 225 years, and Abraham himself, what was it? I should know that. I believe it's 140 years. People are living to 120 years, and then relatively quickly, after a few hundred years, people are living basically the same lifespans that we're accustomed to seeing. Something's different, it seems, about the earth post-flood than pre-flood. And it may be related, just possibly, to the lack of protection against ultraviolet rays compared with what was there before, before the flood. So, all right. Let's move on. Before our break, we will take the next chapter, chapter 8.
Even though we can't get very close to our sun to study it, much research has been done to try and understand how it keeps producing energy. It's a process called fusion. Fusion seems pretty simple at first, but extremely difficult to replicate here on Earth.
Now, when you talk about the sun getting its energy from fusion of hydrogen to helium, it's the same mechanism that powers a hydrogen bomb, which is the most powerful nuclear weapon we have. It's a fusion bomb, not a fission bomb like the atomic bomb was and is.
Now, in the nuclear area, there's two processes. There's nuclear fission, and we do that with our nuclear reactors and naval ships. Nuclear fusion, we've never been able to have a lot of control of. We have some nuclear weapons, but that's not exactly controlled, and we're still working on that to try to harness that. But anyway, the sun does it, and all the stars, even though we can't do it. The sun is converting hydrogen into helium. This can happen in the core of the sun where you have multi-million degree temperatures and enough pressure, enough density to pull that off.
You know, when you burn a piece of wood, a piece of charcoal, that's a set of carbon atoms, and you're bringing some oxygen atoms, and oxygen and carbon like to stick together, whack, and so they release some heat too. So you're fusing atoms. In the case of nuclear fusion, you're fusing nuclei that like to come together, whack, and release some energy. So there's some similarity there. So, and it does happen, and we look at the particles that come out of the center of the sun called neutrinos that are liberated by fusion. So we have a pretty good idea of how much fusion is going on inside the sun.
The design of our sun is genius. From what it produces, there are just a few forces at work to produce our sun's immense energy supply. The laws of physics, established by our Creator, allow the sun to provide exactly what we need to survive.
You have what's called hydrostatic equilibrium. A big fancy word. All that means you have two forces. You have gravity pulling in on the sun like this, and you have pressure pushing out. And the two come to a balance. If the pressure is a little greater than the gravity, then the sun would expand. And as it expands, it would cool a little bit. That would lower the pressure, and it would reach a happy medium again. If gravity's stronger, it pulls in, and as it pulls in, the pressure will increase and it will halt again. So it's self-regulating.
The energy that is released from the core causes an outward pressure that is exactly balanced by the inward force of gravity. Those two things are just precisely balanced, and so the sun remains perfectly stable. As long as it has fuel, it will continue to do that.
So the sun sitting there under this balance, as the interior of the sun produces energy in the form of the heat from the reactions, it's transported outward and then radiated out in space. You got another equilibrium between, it's called thermal equilibrium, which is basically the energy radiated away is equal to the energy produced inside. And these balances are not magical, they're physical. And if they were out of balance, they would quickly readjust and come back into balance. It's a perfect nuclear reactor.
The sun is losing about 4 million tons of matter every second, day and night. And of course it never stops because the sun is always shining somewhere. And so you say, well, how long can that happen? Are we going to get a dark sun one of these days? And all we can say is that if you could see the gas gauge of the sun, it's still pinned on full. It doesn't even miss that 4 million tons per second. It could do that for billions of years. I think the Lord has other plans, but the sun has plenty of energy for this whole age that we live in.
Okay, so what is nuclear fusion? Hydrogen is converted into helium. That is the most common form of nuclear fusion, but it is the production of energy by fusion, by bringing atoms together, as opposed to nuclear fission, which is the creation of energy by shooting a particle into an atom and blowing that atom up and then creating more particles which blow up more atoms, and then you've got, you have the 1945 atomic bombs. That's nuclear fission. Now we've got fusion bombs which detonate, implode, expand all this energy and are even more powerful. Generally speaking, fusion is more powerful than nuclear fission. Have we been able to harness fusion? That's okay. Have we been able to harness fusion? No. We do have nuclear engines. We do have nuclear power plants, but they all rely on fission. If we could harness fusion, that would solve all the energy problems of Earth. It's that much more powerful than nuclear fission. Scientists are working on it. I don't know if God's ever going to allow them to get there. But if they could, that would be all we need for all time here on Earth to be able to regulate nuclear fusion. We have, as human beings, we have developed nuclear fusion. We've put it into bombs, but that is hardly controlled energy. That's just the opposite, uncontrolled energy. What is the sun doing to create nuclear fusion? There's the gravity that, in a sense, holds the sun together. The gravity pushes particles towards the core, but rather than continually pushing in, the energy that's then created creates a pressure that moves outward. So you have this ongoing tension between the gravity of the sun and the pressure of the energy that's produced in fusion pushing out. And they talked about this, that skips ahead to number 5, this perfect equilibrium where the sun is still, with all this stuff going on inside, it is stable. It loses 4 million tons of matter a second, but it still has an almost unlimited amount of fuel still to burn. And it doesn't get terribly bigger, and it doesn't get terribly smaller. The pressure and the gravity work in harmony with each other to keep the sun's furnace going. What example did the video give to help us understand nuclear fusion?
When you make a fire.
When you make a fire, in a sense,
The oxygen and the
yeah.
carbon.
It's not nuclear fusion, but it is fusion of a sort. You're fusing the oxygen in the air with the carbon molecules that are superheated in the wood, and you get fire. Okay? Not nuclear fusion, but a fusion of sorts. This nuclear fusion happens at the atomic level, and hydrogen is fused into helium, and almost incomparable amounts of energy are released. But the energy that's released is controlled by the gravity that still holds the sun together. So a limited amount of that energy actually is released from the sun. The rest of it keeps the sun perpetually producing energy. You go back to the first video that we had on the sun last week, and I think it was Dr. Liesel said, why did God create this incredible machine of the sun to provide our energy when a much smaller machine would have done just fine? Well, because he's God. It wasn't any harder for him to make this than it was for him to make any other mechanism for our Earth to be heated and light to be given to our solar system. But he made this thing, and it is amazing. It is an engine like no engine human beings have ever come up with, self-sustaining. It's just going to keep on going until God stops it, because it could keep going for billions of years. Hey, number 5, we kind of talked about what is hydrostatic equilibrium and why is it so important when considering the sun's nuclear fusion. Yep, the outward pressure is perfectly balanced by the gravity of the sun. So the sun isn't wobbling, getting bigger, then contracting, getting bigger and contracting. It is stable. And in 2 of the 3 videos that we've watched this morning already, that's come up. The sun is stable. It has variances, which are somewhat predictable, but it itself is stable. Not every star in the universe is stable. The earth has been specially created to sustain life. The sun has been specially created to help the earth sustain life. Nuclear fusion, number 6, is the same mechanism that powers what? The hydrogen bomb. The atomic bomb was nuclear fission. But the hydrogen bomb, which came along, and you've probably seen the scale. Like, okay, you take the Nagasaki and Hiroshima bombs, but then you take the bombs that they started developing in the 1950s. They're 100 times more powerful. And then you get to the neutron bomb from the 1980s. That's 1,000 times more powerful. And wow, we're really good at blowing stuff up. We just can't harness it to actually do something productive with it.
That's right, they had 2 bombs, the hydrogen one, and they got 2 different bombs on the 2 places, right? Nagasaki and atomic bombs.
The 2 original atomic bombs were both identical fission bombs, yes. And they were the ones that were tested out in Los Alamos, and it did not take long before they quickly surpassed the power of those bombs. And today's nuclear bombs make Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs look like firecrackers by comparison. Kind of scary when you think about it, but the sun is called the perfect what and why? The perfect nuclear reactor. Why? Well, I think it goes back again to the hydrostatic equilibrium. It's not a bomb. It's so very controlled. It keeps feeding itself, and it has this fuel source inside of itself that's going to last for such a very, very long time. Number 8, is the sun losing matter? Yes, it is. An awful lot of matter, 4 million tons a second. Is that a problem? Nope. It's got much, much more. Yes, if you looked at it, its fuel gauge, the fuel gauge would still be full. How do we know how the whole process works? We can't get there and land a satellite on the sun. Can't really look into the sun. So what are we measuring to come up with these hypotheses on what's going on inside the sun? What are the little atomic particles that are sent out as a result of the sun's fusion? The neutrinos. We can measure the neutrinos, and by taking a sample of how many there are and what they look like, I suppose, scientists can deduce what's going on inside of the sun. And this isn't a controversial point either, by the way, just between creationists and evolutionists. Apparently, for the people who know this stuff, it's pretty obvious what's going on inside the sun. And number 10, what's the other process used to power nuclear reactors? That's fission. And that's rather than bringing something together, fission is breaking something apart, shooting a nanoparticle into an atom in order to create a chain reaction. So, all right, we're going to take a break now. The decaf is Mexican, and the regular is from Papua New Guinea this morning. So enjoy that. We'll come back in about 10 minutes. Okay, welcome back. We've got 2 more chapters to go here. Let's pick it up with chapter 9, the stability of the sun.
When scientists look across the universe at the billions of stars in our galaxy, the uniqueness of our sun becomes apparent. Many stars are quite unstable, making it impossible for life to exist in those systems. Our sun appears to be designed to sustain life for many years to come.
Since the sun is powered by conversion of hydrogen into helium, and since the sun has a finite amount of hydrogen, eventually it would run out. And in the secular view, they'd say, well, then it swells up into a red giant. Regardless of whether or not they're right about the details, the fact is the sun has a finite amount of fuel.
Well, it would take billions of years to do that, yes.
So from a creation perspective, what will happen? Well, we're not going to have to worry about it because the Bible says there's going to be a new heavens and a new earth. But in the secular view, there's no hope.
Recently, they concluded a 30-year study of the surface of the sun, and they found that its output varied by less than 0.1% over the entire 30-year period. So we see other stars flaring, erupting, super flaring frequently. We see our sun amazingly stable.
People might ask, why is the sun so stable? What is the physical reason for that? And I don't think we really know the answer to that. The fact that it's a main sequence star certainly helps, but there are other main sequence stars that do have these super flares. Why is the sun usually stable? The fact is, we really just don't know.
God built our star, I think, to be among the more stable types of stars, and He wanted it to provide steady amounts of energy for us, and so that's what it does.
Okay, most of what we just saw in that video is really covered by the other videos too, but what powers the sun, and could this fuel run out?
It's powered by hydrogen and helium, conversion of hydrogen and helium.
Yeah, the fuel itself is the hydrogen that's extant now in the sun. Could it run out? Not anytime real soon. I mean, theoretically, there's a finite amount, but how long would it conceivably be before the sun died? Billions of years. And according to secular scientists, what would the sun become after that?
It would eventually swell up into a giant.
A red giant. Yeah, it's probably swallowing up the earth, probably. But even if that could possibly happen, it's not about to do that. Number 3, after 30 years, how much did the sun's output fluctuate? 0.1%. And what's the scientific reason for the sun being so stable? You can't pinpoint one, because there are other stars that seem to have the same basic composition as the sun, but they shoot out flares much more frequently and are much more unstable. All we can really say is, the answer to number 5, according to creationists who believe the Bible, why is the sun so stable? God made it that way, yes. So, which is a good segue then into our last chapter today, how the sun shows God's character.
Genesis 1 tells us that God spoke the sun, moon, and stars into being. When we study the sun, it becomes apparent how the Creator's attributes are demonstrated. In His love, the sun was created to sustain creation, to give us warmth, to give us life.
Well, we sure do depend on the sun. When you think about its immense energy and its power production, I think it's a good reminder of God's power, because He spoke the sun into existence and all the other stars as well. So it kind of shows that our God has infinite energy at His disposal, and gave us some in the form of the sun.
When I see the sun, I see this enormous object. I mean, so much bigger than the earth is. So much power and fury, if you will. But it's controlled. It's stable. The forces within it we see in other stars are enough to destroy anything around it. Yet our sun is quiet and stable. Less than 0.1% difference in its output over a 30-year period. Contrast that with even other solar-type stars, stars very much like our sun, that erupt in frequent superflares once per century. Now, God didn't need to create other stars being unstable like that, with ours being the only one that we know of that is so stable. I think He did that as a sign to us about how unique our sun and solar system are, how well designed it is for us to be here, and the care of a loving God to design such a place for us to live.
I think one of the reasons that God made it later is to prevent the Hebrews from worshiping it as a deity, because it does a lot of the things that you would expect of a deity. It provides light, it provides energy, it provides for life.
I think about the working hypothesis that made science and the science revolution possible 400 years ago was that maybe some of God's characteristics were imprinted upon His creation. Stability and care for us. Think of what you might see reflected in the sun, its properties given to it by the Creator.
The sun is central to life on Earth. The more we study it, the more it reveals the impossibility of it coming about by chance and random processes. It was designed by our loving Creator to give us life and stability. Every day you see the sunrise or sunset, praise the Creator for His mercy and love. It draws us to worship the Creator for His amazing design and say, the heavens truly declare the glory of God.
Okay, our final section on the sun here. What is a deity? It's so something divine, something with vast powers that has control to some extent over us here on earth. Why might the Hebrews, or ancient people in general, why might have they wanted to worship the sun?
It does things that you expect of a deity. It provides light, energy, and life.
Yes, and that's what number 2 is all about too. What does the sun do that's like God? It fuels our energy. It is the source from which we get all of our energy here on earth, basically. It comes from the sun. There would be no life on earth without the sun sustaining that life. We understand that God put life here on earth first, that then He was the source of the energy, and He then, in a sense, delegated the energy that He has in and of Himself to the sun to sustain life here on earth. And what kind of energy does God have? Number 3? Infinite, complete power. What does infinite mean? Yeah. And it goes beyond never ending too. It also really means never beginning. It's always been there. And that is such a hard concept for our finite human minds to wrap themselves around. Not just that God has no ending, and we in heaven will have no ending, but God didn't have a beginning, that He has always been there. That time itself is a construct of God. What is a hypothesis? Boy, they really give you a lot of room there under hypothesis. An assumption, but it's more than just an assumption. It's an assumption based on observation that then needs to be proven by further observation. So you don't just hypothesize something out of thin air, like, I think the Brewers are going to score 10 runs tomorrow night. Yeah. You need something to base that on, right? Well, a hypothesis is, from what I've seen, it appears this and this and this. And then I will do further investigation to see if that hypothesis is true. What hypothesis made the science revolution 400 years ago? I think there should be a possible in there. What hypothesis made the science revolution possible 400 years ago? when you think of Newton and Galileo? What was the underlying hypothesis that really started them on their scientific journey?
It says that maybe some of God's characteristics were imprinted upon his creation.
Yes, these were Bible-believing people who said, wow, there is so much to this infinite God as he describes himself in Scripture, and he's given us this vast creation to see as well. Some of his immutable characteristics must be embedded in the creation that he's given us, even in the creation of ourselves. We can learn about God by looking at his creation. That's the underlying hypothesis. Is that what's seen? Can you learn about God from his creation? Absolutely. Romans chapter 1 predicted it. From the beginning, God's immutable qualities have been clearly seen, not from people reading Scripture, but from the natural creation, is what the Apostle Paul is saying. His general point is no one has the excuse that they can disobey God because they didn't get God's law from Mount Sinai the way the Israelites did. No. You can know God by looking at his creation, and especially his creation of human beings, his creation of conscience. You know basically right and wrong from your own conscience. So Paul's conclusion is because God's immutable qualities are embedded in creation, people are without excuse. That's his point. And
Another way to see it is you look at, not today, but you see the sky, you see the trees, you see the rivers, you see the fish. It's all around you.
how we just concluded our look at the sun, this amazing furnace, engine, machine, whatever you want to call it, that's up there fueling life here on earth. And the more you learn about it, the less sense it makes to think that it just popped into being. It just happens to be there. It just happens to be exactly the right distance from Earth. It just so happens to have exactly what we need in the way of a magnetic polar variation to keep all the radiation from the sun from wiping out life here on Earth. Just too many, it just so happens, just too many coincidences for it to be accidental. And there is no coincidence, there is no accident, there is God's creation. And we learn about our Creator then by seeing this vast creation of the sun. So, yes?
Well, we know that because all the other planets aren't livable.
It
He
just
designed Earth
just
and
too
designed
many
just-
coincidences,
just
yes.
for us, because if it was the other way around, you could live on Venus, or you could live on Mars, or you could live on Neptune, but none of those are stable enough for life.
Yes, as Elton John said, Mars is no place to raise a child. Yes.
I do remember that.
Right. All right, so as we conclude our look at the sun today, you can probably guess where we're going next time then. The moon. All right. Haven't been to the moon since like 1975, but there's a possibility we're going back in the not too distant future. But let's close with a short prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, throughout the ages, understandably but wrongly, people have worshipped the sun, the amazing creation that you put in the sky to sustain life here on earth. But when we understand who you are and how much you love us in giving us the sun, we praise you more and more for your intricate design, for your vast power, and for your promise that while life remains here on earth, seed time and harvest, days and nights, seasons and years will never cease until you choose to end this world and take your people home to be with you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.